You know, it's interesting. You've heard about employee engagement, you've heard about management systems and process, right? And you've heard about reliability. So a lot of insight from our panel, as well as Rob, the survey he's conducted with many executives out there. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions, right? We have a world-class panel here, and guys, let's take advantage of these guys. So how about questions from the audience? What's on your mind, and what would you like to know? About 15 minutes.
What are some of the top metrics that we should be looking for in reliability that can really move that needle, move someone out of that third or fourth quartile and get them up into the second or ultimately to the first quartile?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely significant numbers of those, preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance type. I guess the thing, it may not be as good a metric as you want, but if you look at your safety program, as I was mentioning, and your reliability program is not at that level, when I'm talking about going back to this participation, employee participation, I think you've got to, that's your biggest metric, is just trying to get your reliability program as culturally ingrained in your plant or company as your safety program, and build some metrics around that. And here's the other tricky thing for me about plants. Every plant's so different. Their culture is so different. Their leadership is so different, that I would start there is look at your safety program, and let's say it's very successful. How is your reliability program different from that safety program? From a participation, from an employee awareness, why are we doing these things? Just like Forrest was saying, why are we doing this? They may not know. So I think, and you have all your typical predictive, preventive, and all those kind of KPIs that are forward-looking, and you've got to use those. But for me, that's the biggest one. How do you get all the participation?
So one metric we used quite successfully is unplanned, unscheduled UEDC loss, okay? Not only on the units that come down, but all the upstream and downstream impacts. And if you're 3%, you're doing pretty good. If you're less than 2% overall unplanned, unscheduled utilization loss, you're top quartile. And if you're 4 or 5%, you're not going to compete. So that's the overall metric we used to say, how are we doing? Then you got to dissect that. Well, how do you impact that?
Yeah.
That's the overall metric.
Maybe build on that a little bit. Are you in the refining sector? Okay. So world scale, world class, best class refineries, their turnarounds take up 2.5% of their downtime on an average yearly basis. And what we do on turnarounds at Solomon was we annualize those. So I know most turnarounds all happen at once, but on the average, annualized out, turnarounds are going to have to be around 2.5%. Then the unplanned, as we were saying there, your world-class companies have somewhere between 0.5% and 1% of unplanned shutdowns. Now, you also, what's that?
And slowdowns.
And slowdowns, yeah. So what that's saying is most of your downtime is turnarounds. And your world's best companies, they know how to do turnarounds. And they get in and they get out, and they don't waste a lot of time. So that's another key issue, is how well you do your turnarounds. That's another key performance indicator you need to look at.
My name is Linda Hoy from Shell Oil. I have a quick question for James. So I'm curious to hear from you about the 8 operation centers of competency that you mentioned. So I'm curious, in a huge organization with thousands of employees, how do you make it actually stick and sustainable for a big organization? Do you maybe using the competency in the ranking or promotion? Or I'm just interested to hear, how do your employees actually use that competency framework to drive operational excellence?
Well, let me say that the diagram that I put up was intended to be a roadmap, and that there's a lot of interdependencies that are formed between those various operational components. One of the things that we had to avoid, because by our nature as being a bunch of engineers, we like to focus on things, and I think the term that was used by Forrest is that we wanted to not end up with silos. And so if you think about those areas and the way that we actually managed them, we had people and operationally excellent types of approaches in each area, but they were integrated. It was OE and DuPont was one single item. The component parts were subject to a managing organization, or a lead team, if you will, in terms of what we put in place. We ended up calling, in the case of DuPont, I don't know how it works in your companies, but we are real big on acronyms. And in our case, unfortunately, if acronyms got to be at least 4 letters, it became a word. And then you had to check and make sure that wasn't an oath in some dialect somewhere, to be careful with the bigger picture. But the bottom line is that was an example of the areas where you had to work, and they were done in a formally integrated way, so that it wasn't each piece being done separately. They were being done together. Does that make sense? Comment I wanted to make on the metric piece too, though, because I think that metrics that we used there, we tried to use what we referred to in many instances as a leading metric. The leading metrics would be things like, if you said you were going to do something, did you do it when you said you were going to do it? And if you didn't, then you're not doing what you said you were going to do in a way where you're going to get the result you planned. And so metrics for us in these areas in terms of driving change were more focused around not what was happening, but what was supposed to happen, so that we were actually able to look at it in a leading context. And that's how we were able to measure our progress toward the outcome that we really wanted around OE at the corporate level.
This is Rick Weimer from Albemarle. How important is maintenance planning and scheduling to reliability? You know, making a good plan for your jobs and then trying to stick to a schedule.
I'll comment. It's extremely important. If you don't have a good maintenance organization with top-notch tools for planning and scheduling, you might as well forget it, because it isn't going to happen. So it's gotta be there.
All I can say is what he said.
Let me just add one other thing. I just popped in my mind. If you happen to be a plant that your culture is not where you want it to be on reliability and improving, continuous improvement, our data showed that, and we would watch companies over a period of 20-something years, but our data showed it takes about 7 to 10 years for a company to come from 4th quartile all the way up to 1st quartile. 7 to 10 years. And the reason most companies fail is that is an eternity in management time. So management changes in 10 years, maybe 3 times, some companies 4, but that there's that issue that they don't stick with it. There's something else happens, and it's the new policy of the day, and they change. So if you don't stick with it for 10 years, that's how long it takes to change that culture. And we've seen it over and over again.
Rob, you mentioned the importance of bringing process or business and function together. And I find that very interesting. And how do you break those walls down in companies that the very infrastructure is not in alignment with that happening? So, a lot of firms out there, they have a matrix organization. I think you spoke of the value of bringing business and function together, which I think is fascinating. How do you approach that?
I think that was Jim's point. So,
okay, Jim, I'm sorry. How do you approach that when the very infrastructure within a company is not in alignment with that?
Well, that really is sort of to show my age, the $64,000 question. I think the thing that made the difference is that, and this is usually the case for major change, at least it's been my experience in large organizations, we sort of had ourselves standing a little bit on a burning platform. we were at a point where our returns on a net basis weren't improving. We weren't growing the way we needed to grow, and the pressure was felt corporately. And so as a consequence, we had a corporate reason why we wanted to do it. The way that we tended to make it happen, though, is the CEO was wise in the way that they brought everybody together and had us work in small groups and help people learn to know each other. Part of the problem in a big company, in the case of DuPont, at one time we had 20 different business units, 65 corporate officers, and we didn't know each other well enough to be able to have that conversation or have a respectful intervention, if you will, based on being able to say, you're really full of it, but do it in such a nice way that they would see it as a positive comment. So more than anything else, I think the way we were able to do it was to understand that we were the key question, I guess, Ed, was would the shareholder want us to do this? Because we begun to learn to understand it wasn't our money, it wasn't our business, it was owned by the shareholders, and our job was to be good stewards of what they had given us. And when we were able to finally get that piece settled in, and in all candor, have a few people who couldn't see that in that context leave, okay? Not everybody was able to adapt to that approach. Then we started to work in a much more integrated way. The word that was used here that I think was key was collaboration. The whole idea, and if you look at the world around you in decision-making and relationship building, I always see it in 3 C's. You can have competition, which is win-lose. You can have compromise, which is lose-lose, or you can have collaboration, which is win-win. And we sort of sorted it out, and our CEO was a strong supporter of that as an approach, and we put that into the culture. But again, I'll tell you, it's fleeting as well if you don't put it in place where you have the things around it that support it. So that's probably a little more of a hierarchical thought process than maybe you had hoped for, but that's really how it all worked out for us at that point in time.
Thanks, Jim. All right, we have time for one more question, then we're going to close. Yes.
Hi, Todd Muscroft from Innovatia. We were working with a refinery on operator-driven reliability a few years back. They were looking at using operators as the key next thing for them. Dale, maybe Forrest, from an engagement perspective, are you seeing that as a trend in the refining industry?
Yes, I think that's an area that a lot of people are getting into. Not real deep yet in many cases, but it's all about being proactive. And so anytime you can be proactive, find small, fix small, instead of waiting till things fail, you're much better off from a utilization standpoint, from a maintenance cost standpoint. You don't want wrecks. And so operators is your first line of defense against wrecks, right? They hear these things, they smell these things, they know what's going on out there every day, and you want to encourage them to speak up when they notice something different. They may not understand it, but they know it's different. So operator-driven reliability is your first line of defense.
I agree. What we see is going back to that culture. If that culture isn't like your safety culture, so an operator is out there, he understands it's his job as part of the team to make sure that we don't have something break, keep it small, that whole concept. So by all means, they are a very big piece of this thing. They have to be.
We're going to squeeze one more question in. Yes.
Okay. My name is Abdullah Harbi, Sabiq, Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much. This is one of the best panel discussions I attend. Thanks a lot. I think Mr. Jim said that we cannot do everything in the same time. We cannot do all improvement once. So my questions, we heard about, reliability, maintenance, operation excellence. So if you want to bring company from 3rd or 4th quarter all the way to the 1st, where to focus at the beginning?
What is the focus?
Where to focus? What's the top 3 areas or 5 areas we need to focus at the beginning to bring this company to?
And this is what I told every company I would go see. The first focus is reliability. You can't do it all, but that is the thing. You've got to be living and breathing and thinking reliability every day. So that's the focus for me. From my opinion, if you don't have that under control, nothing else will follow.
And I would echo that in the context that says that in your culture, whatever your culture is, you got to find that piece that enables you to start there. In our case, it was safety. Okay? I mean, it's going to be different for everybody in that sense because everybody's culture is different. But in our sense, we started with safety as the mindset, but the ultimate intent was around reliability. Okay? So you got to kind of look at it in a differential context from my personal perspective.
And the beauty of reliability is just like safety, it's a win-win. Everybody's interested in improving safety. Everybody in a plant's interested in improving reliability because it makes their life miserable when you have problems.
Exactly.
All right, okay. So I'd like to say, let's give it a round of applause for the panel.